The solution to your problems can be found in your story. Your story is very important. You should not let anyone fool you and tell you that your story is not important. Your story is very important. I'm Olani Moloi. Today, January 8, 1912, African National Congress, the movement of the people, the movement which is loved by many people, was formed. And again, I believe that when African National Congress was formed, it was at that time when the system was already in control, when the system was fully in control. What do I mean? It's because our warriors, our fighters had already been defeated. For an example, during the Battle of Isandlwana, we can talk about Sekhukhune, we can talk about many others. Our warriors had already been defeated. In other words, the system was very strategic in making sure that everybody would come into submission so that it can spread its wings to the fullest here in South Africa. In other words, ANC was formed at that time. And again, I still believe that when we talk about religion, we talk about politics, we talk about business, we talk about many of these things, they are part of the system. Not because I say it's not a good thing to run a business. What I'm trying to say is that your business cannot be fully effective to the point whereby it becomes a giant unless the system permits. Same applies to religion, same applies to politics, same applies to many other things. So African National Congress was formed at that time, and credit has to be given where it's due, because these people were like, we have to unite all African people, because at that time black people here in South Africa were already divided because of the system, because that was the purpose of the system. Because you have to bear in mind, the system is all about divide and rule. In 1911, Pixlika Isaka Seme called on Africans to forget the differences of the past and unite in one national organization. He said, we are one people. These divisions, these jealousies are the cause of all our wars today. On January 8, 1912, chiefs, representatives of people, and church organizations and other prominent individuals gathered in Bloemfontein and formed the African National Congress. The ANC declared its aim to bring all Africans together as one people to defend their rights and freedom. That's a good thing. That's what we want, because it's all about liberating our people. But as I've said, that ANC was formed when the system was already in control. I always have question marks. When I grew up, I used to believe anything to say everybody is a hero. Everybody was fighting for freedom. But later on in my life, I had to change my perception as I go through these things, as I try by all means to deal with these things. Because my first question mark is that you cannot fight against the system and still find yourself in their territory. How so? It's because most of these leaders of African National Congress studied in Britain. You cannot use the education system of the system to deal with the system. You cannot find yourself in their territory if you are a threat to deal with them. In other words, if you are in the territory, if you are in their territory and they don't deal with you, then it means you are not a threat at all. So that is why I believe that African National Congress, according to my perception, was passive. This is for educational purposes. I'm not encouraging or discouraging anyone from like voting or not voting for African National Congress. But my focus is that we have to know these things as they are. So that is why I'm like, you cannot study in their territory and be their threat and think that you will come out of their territory and overthrow them and deal with them just like that. It doesn't happen often. It can happen, but it doesn't happen often, because if you look into the profiles of these leaders who came from African National Congress, many of them studied in Britain. Many of them studied in Britain. So this is a big question mark, because when it comes to education system, you cannot adopt the education system of their system. In other words, you have to stick to your own education system. And again, I have evidence, or I have the proof why, as time goes by, many people started doubting African National Congress, or few people started doubting African National Congress. Is the birth of PAC. Why PAC was formed? If you look into their profile, you look into their history, PAC was formed because those who formed it had believed that ANC had lost its momentum, believed at that time that ANC was no longer active as it used to. So that is why ANC lost like certain members or people who were the members of the organization. It's because of that, because many people were like, now we are aware that it's like in church. You go to church, you go to church, you go to church, but you realize that these people are not serving the person they always say they are serving, or the person they claim to be serving. In other words, they are serving somebody else. So at that time, or at that point, you are like, let me just leave. So the same thing happened with those who started PAC, like Robert Sobukwe and many others. So again, I'm not trying to discredit ANC. That is why I'm like, credit has to be given where it's due. So they were like, we have to bring people together. We have to bring Africans together. But if you bring Africans together, you should not try to use the organs of the system or to use the pillars of the system to do so. I believe that at that time, the system was already attached with African National Congress, even though it was invisible at that time. But I believe that those who got out of ANC at that time had already identified some of those things, some of those footsteps of the system. Because at that time, ANC was now changing their mission statement, changing their beliefs and everything. They were now like, South Africa belongs to all who live in it. In other words, they had changed at that time. So that is why I believe that the system at this time was already in control. The system was already in charge, because the voting system is very questionable. That is why there is no African country, especially sub-Saharan African countries, that are effective, that are doing well as a result of the voting system. It belongs to the West. So you cannot use their tools and then expect to defeat them. So this is my perception. And again, as I've said, that we have to give credit where it's due. And again, ANC or African National Congress should not try to get credit to each and everything that took place during apartheid, because we had PAC, we had like Black Consciousness and many other movements whose their mission was to deal with the system as well. So in other words, African National Congress did not fight alone. And again, the other thing is that those other movements that were established after ANC were established as a result of ANC being passive. So that is why those organizations, those movements at that time were more active than African National Congress. Not trying to discredit African National Congress, but I'm just giving you my perception so that at the end of the day you can take my perception and other people's perception and mainstream media perception, which is very famous. Then you can bring them together and say, you know what, this is what I believe and this is what I do not believe. Then now, during 1994 or the process towards 1994, I'm very skeptic with that process. I'm very skeptic, especially from 1990 until 1994. Those negotiations, because if you are, for an example, let's say maybe you are running a company and you have to negotiate with another company. In other words, you have to agree with certain terms before the deal can be made, before the deal can be accomplished. In other words, you are going to defend your company no matter what, even if we have to meet halfway. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you also put the interest of your company first. Even if we say, okay, let's come together. Let's try by all means to settle this thing. Let's try by all means to sign this deal. But at the end of the day, I'm going to focus on my interest. I'm going to put my interest first, and you are going to do the very same thing as well. But when it comes to this or these negotiations, I have a big question mark, because it's like black people were not represented very well, were not represented accordingly. Especially when it comes to what? Especially when it comes to business, because I don't want to talk about religion. I don't want to talk about education, because even the education system that was handed down to us was very poor at that time. Even now, maybe I can say is still poor to a certain extent. But I just want to focus on business, because business is the core of every country, because business generates money, generates income. This is where black people were disadvantaged. They were not represented. Some people may say it was a mistake, but my perception is different. I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was intentional, because I believe that the system was already in control. The system was already in charge. As the system made sure that during the Battle of Isandlwana, they win, they become victorious, they defeat all these other warriors. Even in 1994, they also did the very same thing. They made sure that when we allow African National Congress, or when they allow African National Congress to rule, it has to do so under its own terms. I believe so. I know politicians will disagree with me, but here I'm trying by all means to give my perception without being biased. But this is what I believe, without saying you have to vote for this political party, you have to follow this politician. Without saying so, I believe that it was intentional. There was no mistake, because when you negotiate, you know what is your priority. You know what defines the identity of your country. You know about business. You know about all these things. But what they did, they introduced all these things such as free education. Okay, there's nothing wrong about free education, but is it the education system that we fought for? Is it the education system that we want? So now you can tell based on the results that no, this education system was not the education system that we wanted, because this education system is not working for us, or is not working for majority of the people. So this is my perception with regards to African National Congress, how it was formed. Yes, it was formed based on principles to unite people, to give people freedom. But again, the reason we say the struggle continues is because we don't have that freedom they promised, or we haven't reached the freedom they promised. This is my perception. As I've said, that I'm trying by all means not to be biased, even though we are living under the difficult circumstances. I believe that they were aware, but they went ahead with everything that the system wanted. They gave us everything. They gave us human rights. They gave us all these things except their business. And even the things that they gave us, they are still questionable. We can talk about these human rights. We can talk about education and many other things. They are still questionable because there's no quality there. There's no quality. We can talk about, for an example, the family structure of a black person has deteriorated. We can see that right now alcoholism is on top of the world. People are enjoying themselves, but the system is actually enjoying them. They are not enjoying themselves. It's the system that is enjoying them. Why? Because if you give people poor education, you remove their culture, you remove all these things, they are going to lose their identity. And again, if they lose their identity, they are going to become whoever you want them to be. So that is why right now we have many people right now who are struggling in the name of the system, and they're not even aware that it's the system. We can talk about drug abuse and many other things. It's as a result of the system, because these things, man, you can deal with them very quick. You can get rid of them very quickly, but it's not happening because they are part of the system. So this is my perception. Right now, as we speak, we can say African National Congress has accomplished certain things, but according to me, the main thing, which is freedom, they did not achieve this one. It's up to you to look at other people's perspectives. What are they saying about this topic, about how ANC was formed and everything? You can combine these perspectives, and then at the end of the day, you can decide what to believe and what not to believe. But right now, as we speak, the struggle continues.